everybody. So first part of class is going to be some information stuff. Just try to be shoot straight with you and adapt, improvise, overcome. Test. So our test is going to be delayed. It will not be Wednesday. It will be administered via Moodle. So that gives you guys time to make sure that your phones are charged or your computers are set up, or if you have to go to a library, it's giving you time to prep. This may be new for you. This is definitely new for me. I've never given a non-hard copy test before in my life. So just remember that it's this adaptation is reciprocated on both of our parts. So the best thing that you guys can do is check your emails regularly for instructions, communications. Also, I am willing to FaceTime if need be, if you guys have questions or need. I know email sometimes is real tough for explaining positions and motions and test questions. So my cell is 337-501-0634. And the best thing to do is not to just outright call, because I always assume everyone's a spammer nowadays. So if you can text me first, give me your name, give me the class, because remember I have a class right after this, biomechanics, and let me know what you want to talk about, or let me know your question to give me a heads up, and we'll talk about it. Either call or FaceTime, and that way you can act out what you're having problems with, and I can help you for your understanding. Okay. I want to remind you, and I know this is not as easy as been watching Netflix, man. I've been there. I've literally, during the summertime, when I have a couple weeks off, I know what it's like, and my classes aren't as cool as Henry Cavill. I get it, but this is the first semester I have ever uploaded my lectures. Maybe it was meant to be. Maybe this was a sign from the Almighty. So my point is that for those of you that gave me good feedback, and I appreciate your feedback. I'm not snapping on you. But for those of you that had feedback about you're not prepared, you can help yourself by going back and rewatching those lectures. What I mean by that is it's actually better to rewatch when I started from the beginning versus me just kind of trying to simplify it or clarify stuff. You could literally watch this from the beginning. Even if you're having struggles with planes and axes, you can watch all that stuff from the beginning. You have the ability, and that's where your classmates can maybe help. If they may know exactly where, but all of the lectures, every single, even the syllabus lecture, is up on Moodle. And I went and checked the other day, and they had like I just went to random videos, and the most views any video had was 7 views. And 2 of them were mine when I checked to make sure it was up, and when I just clicked on it to see how many views. And I'm sure my sons were probably thinking I was cool because I had a video on YouTube. My point is that this is where you can help yourself. You can help me help you, because it's just a total resource of any questions you need clarified or answered. Especially if we're going to be, at home for a while. And look, little bites of the apple. I'm not saying you got to binge it, but just a lecture here, go do something, lecture there, and it'll really help. Okay. So basically, I'm going to go over, today's lecture is going to be a review of everything you're going to be accountable for the next test, but with the preface of go watch the previous lectures. Go watch them. It'll help you. It'll help you. I think you guys can understand that I don't want anyone to not pass this semester, right? This is different, it's great, but you got to help me help you. You got to help me help you. And that's the best way you can help me help you, is by rewatching some of those lectures. Monday's lecture is going to be new material. It is going to be new material. It's going to be muscles and how muscles influence motion. And don't freak out about new material. We have to move forward. We got to keep moving. So it's okay to learn new stuff. You can hear a new song on the radio and be like, that's a cool new song. I may want to hold on to that. And you can still listen to the songs you've heard before that you liked before, okay? So we have to move forward. And the reason I want to move forward, I don't want to make it seem like I'm pressing and speeding things up, but this is all new to me. So I want to make sure that you guys have the information that you're going to need as early as possible to give you as much time as possible to prepare for our last test, okay? Remember, all this material is like a staircase. Every step supports and builds on itself. So, you know, maybe some classes, new material is like literally, okay guys, we're gonna go from chapter 4 to chapter 18, and you just skip all this stuff. That's not how this stuff works. I'm trying to get you to master, or at least highly develop motion, position in motion, so that we could say, okay, that's cool. We move. Here's how we can move. Here's illusions of motion. What's moving us? And so that's when I come in and teach you about the concepts of muscles as puppet strings. And it's the muscles, for the most part, that's either gonna make us move. Sometimes they work to prevent us from moving. Like if I have my arm out and I want to keep it out, I need to recruit certain puppet strings to prevent me from moving. And sometimes these puppet strings let us move. Sometimes they work to slow us down. They slow down motion. They speed up motion. They keep things moving at the same speed of motion. So the point is that it still comes down to motion. It still comes down to position in motion, okay? So, pelvic girdle rotations. I'm going to do a review of pelvic girdle rotations, because it seems like that's when stuff started getting freaky, and it is freaky. Remember, in previous lecture, pelvic girdle rotations are a perspective of position and motion just from your pelvic girdle. And what is your pelvic girdle? Your pelvic girdle is your left hemipelvis and your right hemipelvis articulated onto the sacrum. They call that the sacroiliac joint. These articulations do not move independently of each other in any other way than just a little bit of sway in mostly their sagittal plane. They're kind of off to the side. They call it it's kind of a combination of sagittal flow. And that's only because when we move our hips and legs, we kind of want to give a little bit of sway so that we don't have too bad thoughts. But the point is that I can't move them like I do my scapula. So the concept is that if this side and this side is attached to the middle part, and it's impossible for me to make the left one do this and the right one do this, then they kind of have to all move together. They have to. Or like this, I can't make this one do this and this one do this. So they have to move together. It's one block functionally. And that one solid block is important because the skyscraper of our spine needs a solid foundation to be built upon. So the perspective of pelvic girdle rotations is, how does the pelvis see itself spinning in either sagittal, frontal, or transverse? Now, just because the pelvis has a perspective of motion and position, and I taught you in the previous lecture why, and it's important because of posture, gait. For you guys that are going to be going off and working in allied health in different areas, man, we need to be able to see how the pelvis is what they call tilted or positioned for a myriad of different reasons. But seeing pelvic tilt and seeing pelvic motion from the perspective of the pelvis is very important. But that wasn't the end of it. I think what gets confusing is that if you notice, the pelvis isn't a joint. The pelvis is just a perspective. So in class, I used the basketball analogy. The basketball can spin anteriorly, posteriorly. The pelvis can spin to the right, left, lateral. The pelvis can spin right, left, right, right. But that basketball, the basketball analogy that I gave of the pelvis, that basketball cannot spin itself. Even if you put it at the top of a hill and let it roll, that basketball ain't rolling itself. It's gravity. All right, something has to be responsible for the spin of the pelvis. When I lectured on the hips, and this is why I did it because I didn't want to overwhelm you, but when I lectured on the hips, I told you guys, and we talked about how the hips can spin the basketball. When your feet are on the ground, that basketball isn't going anywhere until I have hip motion. Now, it could be hips plural, or it could be hip. I could rotate it about my right, my left, frontal, my right, my left, transverse, my right, or my left. But the point is that that pelvis isn't going anywhere. That basketball isn't going anywhere until something spins it, or something is responsible for the motion. So there's two separate questions. Is the pelvis rotating? Is the pelvis spinning? If yes, how? Sagittally, we're looking at anterior, posterior spin, rolling forward, rolling back, pouring water out the front, pouring water out the back. If you want to look at it from the side, anterior, posterior, and that anterior and posterior pelvic girdle rotation can look a lot of different ways, but it's the same concept. So watch. I can not move my trunk. In other words, if I want to keep my shoulders or head level, I can have anterior and posterior, anterior and posterior. That's hard to see unless you know what to look for. If I didn't move my trunk, you'd see this. But my trunk extends at the same velocity, so you see this. In other words, if I froze my trunk and extended my hips, see my trunk extended. Anterior, posterior. What moved the pelvis? How did it move? It rotated. How did it rotate? Either anteriorly or posteriorly in the sagittal plane. And then what moved it? What spun the basketball? What was responsible? The responsible part of this pelvic girdle rotation when my feet are on the ground is not my trunk. Because I can still anteriorly and posteriorly rotate without moving my trunk. I don't have to move my trunk. But you know what I have to move? I have to move my hips. And being on the ground, the only way my pelvis is going to move is if my hips move it. So that's key. When the feet or foot is on the ground, that pelvis isn't going anywhere until hip motion makes it go somewhere. And then anything you observe in the trunk is for functional circles. In other words, if I don't want to go along for the ride, I have to move my trunk to cancel out in essence. But that trunk motion did not spin the pelvic girdle. The trunk motion just helped to kind of keep either my eyes and or my hands balanced. It's like shock absorber. Here would be a frontal plane example of what we just talked about. Right lateral, left lateral. My trunk can move to cancel out that motion, but my pelvis isn't spinning until my hips spin. Right lateral pelvic girdle rotation, left hip add, right hip add. Left lateral pelvic girdle rotation, left hip add, right hip add. Back up a little bit, and you can see my hips. This is anatomical position from the perspective of my pelvis. If I do this, my left hip is abducted, my right hip is adducted. If I do this, my left hip is adducted, my right hip is adducted. Again, my trunk can't make my basketball spin. If my trunk moved by itself, it's just going to move the trunk. My trunk can move with pelvic girdle rotation, but that's for my functional circle. If I'm trying to keep my hands level and I don't want my trunk to go home for the ride, I'm going to bend my trunk back the other way to keep my hands and my eyes level. My pelvis is going to be moved by my hips when my feet are on the ground. So if you understood that concept when I lectured on it about how the hips are going to make the pelvis rotate when we did the hip lecture, all I'm asking you to do is just say, okay, well, if my hips rotate my pelvis when my feet are anchored, then my trunk is going to rotate the pelvis when my upper extremity is anchored. It's just flipping the role of what's fixed and what's allowed to move. So when my feet are off the ground, now my hips are free to move independently, and my pelvis doesn't have to go anywhere. The only way my pelvis is going to now rotate is if my trunk rotates it. Okay? So now what we're looking at is, if this is the pelvis, assume this is the pelvis. Okay? Let's assume we have a slinky. The pelvis, watch. This is high tech, guys. Super high tech. So this is going to be my spine. Okay? This is going to be my spine. And this is going to be my pelvis, right? So the point is that the only way, if you're up off the ground and your feet are dangling, the only way to make the pelvis sway side to side is to bend the trunk. It's the only way. And the only way to make the pelvis pour water out the front and pour water out the back is to bend the trunk. And the only way to make the pelvis look to the right or look to the left is to twist the trunk when the trunk is anchored or fixed. That's why it should make sense that when you're on a Roman chair up and you're doing these things, you're working your trunk muscles, because that's what's actually moving. So if that's what's moving, you have to have those muscles to move. Okay? So the key thing here, and I try to draw these pictures, maybe if I do a review, I can have new sets of pictures. When your trunk is off of the ground, the trunk is what's going to spin the pelvic curve, not your neck. In other words, if I'm off the ground, I can independently move my neck because it's not anchored. It's not anchored anywhere. Right? I can still look to the left, look to the right, this, that, and the other thing. But the actual trunk is what's going to potentially spin the basket. Okay? The confusing part about this is rights and lefts, where from the pelvis's perspective, left lateral pelvic is because of right lateral trunk. Think of it like this. Think of it like this. If I had, let's say, this little prop, but let's say I was standing. I'm not going to do it because I'm old. But let's say I was standing on the chair, okay? And someone, I'm standing up here on the table. This is me. And someone takes the chair and rotates it so that it spins to its left. Well, if I didn't do anything, I'd go along for the ride. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be tilting back this way. So what is that kind of tilt? Right. I'm going to be leaning to the right. When your car or when a motorcycle starts to turn left, what do? You bend back to the right. You think about making that turn on your bicycle. If you're turning left, you're going to lean back to the right. Okay? So that's the essence of what I'm trying to teach you, is that when your feet are off the ground, legs are dangling, if your pelvis spins left laterally, it's because your trunk bent right frontal. Same concept. So this way. Same concept in the sagittal plane. So let's say we're looking at the pelvis's sagittal plane. So now I'm facing this way. Posterior pelvic girdle rotation because of trunk flexion. You see how if someone's trying to push you back, you're going to compensate by flexing forward. Okay? So feet off the ground, hanging from a bar, or in a Roman chair, that posterior pelvic girdle rotation is going to be because of trunk flexion. The anterior pelvic girdle rotation is going to be because of trunk extension. tougher one. I'm gonna have to get creative here. So here's my face. Eyes facing forward, okay? Remember, right transverse, left transverse. But if the pelvis spins to its left, that's because the trunk spun to its right. And if the pelvis spins to its right, that's because the trunk spun to its left. That is the definition or application of cap and bottom. They have to spin in opposition if you're going to open it. If the cap spins to the left, it's as if the bottle spun to the right. And if the bottle spins to the right, it's as if the cap spun to the left. They have to have opposition motion. Okay? Now the positive of that is that there's no exceptions. There is no exceptions. When you're hanging from a bar for your test, you should be like, I got this. Because when your feet are off the ground, the trunk and the pelvis, if there's pelvic girdle motion, those things have to be in opposition of each other. Like, so there's no exception. Because think about it. If I'm hanging from a bar, if my upper extremity isn't allowed to move, the only way my pelvis can spin to the right and my trunk bend to the right is if I broke off the bar and went down in the same direction. That's the only way that can happen. If my trunk does a right spin, my pelvis does a right spin, and I want my trunk to go that way, I'd have to literally break the piece off to put a bend in the trunk. It's not going to happen. So right lateral pelvic, left lateral trunk. Left lateral pelvic, right lateral trunk. Guys, look at how my shirt is bending, guys. There's clues in the clothing. Look at how my shirt is bending. It's bending back to the left. Hanging from the bar, posterior pelvic girdle rotation because of trunk flexion. Anterior pelvic girdle rotation because of trunk extension. Posterior pelvic trunk flexion, anterior pelvic trunk extension. Right transverse pelvic girdle rotation because of left transverse trunk. Left transverse trunk because of left transverse pelvic because of right transverse trunk. They have to be in opposition. Okay? So that's pelvic girdle review. But feel free to go look at the other lectures where I broke that stuff down. Okay? All right. I'm gonna talk to my audience and see if there's any particular, I'm giving you the chance, y'all are leading the class today. Is there any particular joint that we talked about that you want me to do a kind of more in-depth review for this class? Anything in particular?
Can we go over like knees?
The knees? Yeah. Let's go over the knees. So the knee is a modified hinge joint. So the hinge is going to be sagittal plane only, helping us to get into ball out of ball, in the fetal out of fetal. So for the knee flexion is going to help us get into a ball. Let's see. Knee flexion, knee extension. It could also look like this, knee flexion, knee extension. Remember, even though it looks different globally, it's the same exact thing happened locally. In other words, from the knee's perspective, this is the same angle change as this. Right? That darn knee, though, when we flex it or unlock it, we allow some rotation, just like the hip can rotate in its transverse plane about its polar axis. When we unlock the knee has some rotation in its transverse plane about its polar axis. Now, it's important to remember, though, that the polar axis for this joint is from the tibia's perspective of a pole, not the femur, because when we flex it, the femur's polar axis is going to be internal external rotation of the hip, So it's the tibias, it's about the long bone of the tibia that we're looking at, internal and external rotation, okay? So literally this. The internal and external rotation of the knee follow the same rules as internal and external rotation of the hips and the shoulders, okay? So at the hip, we talked about, hey, right hip, external, internal, external, internal. Hey, hip, rotate laterally. Because remember how I said the whole concept of lateral medial is the right of a right, the left of a right, the left of a left. We don't have lefts and rights of a left and a right. It is our left and a right, so we have to have other terms. That's why we get lateral and medial. Hey, right hip, spin laterally. Right hip, spin medially. So it's the exact same concept for the knee. Hey, right knee, spin laterally. Right knee, spin medially. And as we know, lateral and medial are synonymous for external and internal. Okay? That's the easy part. That's the introductory part. The harder part is when we move the cap over the bottle or vice versa. So when my foot is off the ground and I'm moving the tibia about the femur, it looks like this. But when I fix the tibia and move the femur, it looks differently. It's the same exact motion, but it looks different. So that's why if you look at in your textbook, or if you go back and review my knee lecture, when I have the skeleton in here, external rotation of the knee is when you cut and plant, and your body is rotating where your instinct wants to say medial, but your knee is rotating lateral. Your knee is rotating external. Your knee, if this is the femur and this is the tibia, when I cut and plant on my right leg, this is what's happening. And this is external rotation of the right. Cut, plant, you're externally rotated. You'd have to internally rotate it to go back home. You're externally rotated. Okay. What else? Okay. Okay. All right. So I am open to review suggestions. So in other words, because this is my first venture into online teaching, look, maybe it was meant to be. Maybe this is the first semester ever that I've uploaded every lecture. Ever. Maybe maybe somebody was trying to tell me something. So my point is that you guys have access. You have access to everything. If planes and axes still giving you little problems, you have access. For me, literally starting from the beginning. I guess my point is that being able to have the full lectures is better resource than any clarification I can give you. It's better than any clarification I can give you because it starts from the beginning. It walks you down the path, okay? So that is my challenge to you guys who aren't quite riding the bike yet. You're going to get there. But if you're not quite riding the bike and you feel you need to be riding the bike, go back, watch those lectures. Go back and watch those lectures. And then anybody who needs clarification. So in other words, the point of the Skype or phone conversations that I'm offering you guys is not to re-lecture anything. You already have access to all of that stuff. It's to clarify things. Like, in the lecture you said this. I'm not quite sure what that means. In the lecture you use this analogy. That doesn't quite work for me. Can you come up with a different analogy? That's what I'm offering, is a chance to clarify, fine-tune with you the content, okay? So, on Monday, I'm going to have the lecture posted on Moodle. In other words, we're going to try to keep the same schedule. I'm not gonna take a 7:30 a.m. class and say I'll post the lecture later in the afternoon. I'm gonna try to have that lecture up and posted at 7:30, so that we can try to stay in a rhythm. I'm not saying you got to set your alarm, but what I'm saying is when you get up, you have a lecture waiting for you to watch. Okay, and then please check your emails because I need to learn how to administer a test on, I've never done it before. So I gotta learn how to do it. I gotta make sure I do it right. I gotta make sure that everything's set up the right way. And it also gives you guys that are like, we need more time, that gives you the time, okay? That gives you the time to prep, okay? So, in summary, check your emails. New lecture on muscles on Monday. If you want to read ahead, look at muscles. I think it's phase 3 in your book. And then I will post when the exam is going to be. Now, I know traditionally we like to give exams on Wednesdays, but because now being here isn't a limiting factor, we may, be given a test on Monday or Friday, or I might get y'all feedback for that as well. Okay. In closing, this is real. Are people freaking out? Absolutely. But let me re-explain why. Our healthcare system can only handle so many people at one time. We only have so many ventilators. We only have so many doctors. And so all of this precaution is exactly what it is, precaution. It's to try to, what they call, round the curve. If we let this get out of hand, then all of a sudden someone who may need a ventilator doesn't have access to a ventilator. So the more we can slow play the spread of this, and remember, this is a new virus. This is the kind of virus that's out there right now is from a critter that we have never contacted before. In other words, as people get more and more people, they're going to be going deeper and deeper into forests to hunt, and we are exposed to populations of animals that we've never been exposed before, and those animals have germs we've never been exposed to. So the point is that we don't have any built-up immunity to this thing because it's never encountered humans before. So first of all, we don't know, but second of all, the attempt to try to slow down the spread of this is to try to help our healthcare man, to try to limit the burden and what our hospitals can handle. Okay, so let's be sensitive to that. It's not just about me. It's not just about you. It's about us. Mankind, humankind. So wash those hands as much as possible. Try to avoid face contact. But let's just remember, man, I know this is an inconvenience for a lot of you, but it could be a lot worse. It could be a lot worse, okay? So we got this.